Today on Variant, we're kicking off one of my favorite months of the year, Star Wars month, with the history of the Jedi. Welcome to Variant, where we love comics more than I can't wait to see the return of Darth Vader. I'm your host, Arris. With Rogue One fast approaching, we are diving headfirst into a new series of Star Wars themed episodes that will lead up to the movie's release date. And I have to tell you, I couldn't be more excited about it. As you can imagine, between Star Wars Legends and canon, the Jedi have a deep and extremely developed history. Way too much for me to cover all in one episode. So for today, we're gonna stick to the highlights of their history that are in canon. If we miss a piece here and there, don't worry, we'll likely get into that in a future episode. With that said, let's jump into the thick of it and talk about some Jedi history, shall we? The Jedi are an ancient order of guardians that date back thousands of years, whose code and entire way of life was guided by the belief in and the use of the light side of the Force. Here's a little fun fact for you guys. George Lucas created the word Jedi from the Japanese term Jedajiki, which refers to a drama set during the Edo period of Japanese history, when samurai were the elite warriors of the day. Anyway, members of the Jedi Order were required to follow certain principles, including self-discipline, responsibility, patience, and public service. A set of ethics and behaviors that became known as the Jedi Code. As each Jedi was trained in the ways of the Force, they were required to progress through several different ranks, starting as a Jedi youngling. Most Force-sensitive children were identified shortly after birth, and would undergo training as a youngling. This initial training concluded with the gathering ritual. You see, while Jedi Knights primarily operated as diplomats, they were also required to be masters of the Force and deadly with their signature weapon, the lightsaber, when Force was required. That being the case, the gathering was an ancient rite of passage ritual where a Jedi youngling would find the kyber crystal that was most attuned to their own Force presence. They would then construct their own lightsaber with the help of an architect droid, Professor Huyang. Upon completing the gathering, the youngling would then need to be chosen by a Master Jedi to become a Padawan learner under their instruction and wear a braid to distinguish them as a Padawan. Once the Master felt the Padawan was ready, they would begin the Jedi Trials, during which they would be heavily tested in the areas of teamwork, isolation, fear, anger, betrayal, focus, instinct, forgiveness, and protection. If they were able to successfully pass all the Jedi Trials, the Padawan would then be given the status of Jedi Knight and would be allowed to perform solo missions for the Republic. However, only the most skilled and experienced knights would go on to become masters and train Padawans themselves. A Jedi Master could also only have one apprentice at any given time. Now, early in the Jedi's history, during a time referred to as the 100 Years of Darkness, a rogue Jedi began searching for knowledge and power through the dark side of the Force. The Jedi leadership completely rejected this practice, but the Jedi turned Sith had already amassed a very large following, and eventually a civil war erupted. After many years of fighting, the dark side of the Force caused the Sith to turn on each other, and this weakness allowed the Jedi to defeat them. Or so they thought. Some of the Sith actually managed to survive and settle on the planet Moraban, where they would quietly regroup and wait for the right opportunity to exact revenge on the Jedi. I'll also add that if you want more in-depth info on the Sith, be sure to check out our History of Sith episode right here. But the Jedi's victory over the Sith brought peace to the galaxy and led to the birth of the Galactic Republic, for which the Jedi served as a peacekeeping force for over 1,000 years, with Yoda leading the Order as the Grand Master Jedi for much of that era. Also, during this time, the Jedi Order's primary base of operation was the heavily guarded Jedi Temple, located on the galactic capital planet of Coruscant. Here, Jedi Masters led by their High Consul would monitor the Republic, plan missions, study the nature of the Force for the Great Jedi Archive, and train young Padawans until they reached Jedi Knight status. The original Jedi Temple has actually been mentioned or referenced several times between The Force Awakens and Rogue One, implying that it might have a role in the upcoming storylines. So that's something to look out for, but the temple on Coruscant wasn't the only one. There were also small outposts and temples spread around the galaxy, the most notable of which would be on the ice world of Ilum. The Ilum Temple was considered by the Jedi to be the most sacred world to the Jedi Order, as its caves were full of kyber crystals, and it was the location where the Jedi younglings would carry out the gathering ritual. With the galaxy experiencing a prolonged peace, the Jedi fully embraced their role as the peacekeepers and interplanetary law enforcement with the assistance of the Republic judicials. But these peaceful times wouldn't last, as disputes between the Republic's member worlds became more and more common. The increased conflict led Jedi Master Sidious to push for the creation of a clone army for the Republic, an idea that the Jedi Council rejected as too extreme. But Sidious contacted the Kaminoans, who were well known for their clone hatcheries, and secretly commissioned them to grow a clone army for the Republic anyway, by telling them that it was requested by the Senate. What Sidious didn't know was that the Sith Lord named Darth Sidious had quietly infiltrated the Galactic Senate under the persona of Senator Palpatine of Naboo. And when Sidious was tipped off about the secret army, he conspired with the Kamonian Prime Minister to implant a control chip in all the clones so that when the time was right, he could use them to destroy the Jedi. Darth Sidious then had Sidious murdered in order to keep the army a secret, and began orchestrating and manipulating a series of conflicts between the Republic and Separatist groups or hostile organizations that were under his control, all while playing both sides. After one of the first of these conflicts between Naboo and the Trade Federation, Sidious/Palpatine managed to manipulate a series of events that led to him being elected the Chancellor of the Republic. It was during this time that the Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn discovered a young slave and pod racer named Anakin Skywalker on the planet Tatooine. Jinn believed that the boy was the chosen one who would bring balance to the Force, and took him into the Jedi Council to be admitted as a youngling. But the Council led by Yoda initially rejected Anakin, as they said he was too old to begin training. But when the Sith finally revealed themselves and Qui-Gon was killed by Darth Maul, Obi-Wan Kenobi was made a Jedi Knight, and despite Yoda's reluctance, took Anakin as his apprentice out of respect for his fallen master. A few years later, the Separatist crisis led to Obi-Wan's discovery of the secret clone army commissioned by Sidious, which in turn sparked the beginning of the Clone Wars. During the Clone Wars, the Jedis were once again militarized, with Jedi Masters and Knights acting as generals in the Republic's Grand Army, and their Padawans as commanders, spreading the Jedi thinner and thinner as the battles grew in number and more Jedi were killed in action. After years at war, Anakin Skywalker, who was now a Jedi Knight in general, uncovered Palpatine's true identity as Darth Sidious, and informed Master Mace Windu. But when Windu assembled a team of Jedi to confront and arrest Palpatine, Anakin intervened, having been seduced by the dark side, and saved the Sith Lord, causing Mace Windu's death. Palpatine then made Anakin his apprentice, giving him the name Darth Vader, and declared the Jedi to be traitors and enemies of the Republic. This allowed him to finally use the control chips planted in the clone soldiers long ago, and he ordered them to turn on the Jedi and execute them all. A plan the Emperor called Order 66. Sidious also sent his new apprentice with a group of clone troops to kill any Jedi left in the temple, including the younglings. This massacre brought about the murder of thousands of Jedi within just a few minutes. The few who survived, including Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, and Ahsoka, went into hiding. But before doing so, Yoda and Obi-Wan took Vader's newborn children, Luke and Leia, who were born out of a secret marriage to Senator Padme, and hid them from the Sith in hopes that they would one day make up for their father's crimes. Now, with the Jedi out of the way, Darth Sidious declared himself Emperor and banned all teachings or discussion of the Jedi. He also commissioned a group of hunters known as the Inquisitors to hunt down and kill any remaining Jedi throughout the galaxy. But nearly a decade after the rise of the Imperial Empire, another Jedi who escaped, Kanan, formed a small rebel alliance that would grow in strength, and eventually lead to the emergence of Leia Skywalker, now known as Leia Organa, as a political and military leader against the Empire. Luke Skywalker was also secretly trained in the ways of the Jedi by Master Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda. Together, the two helped the Rebel Alliance bring about the death of Emperor Palpatine, and thus defeat the Empire during the Battle of Endor and Return of the Jedi. After the fall of the Empire, Yoda instructed Skywalker to pass on what he had learned, so that the legacy of the Jedi Order could go on, as he believed him to be the last Jedi. Which of course leads us to the events revealed in The Force Awakens, where we learn that Luke has gone into exile after attempting to train a new generation of Jedi, only to see it all destroyed when his student and nephew Ben Solo turns to the dark side and kills all his fellow apprentices as a member of the First Order. What happens to the Jedi next is anybody's guess, but I for one can't wait to find out. As I mentioned at the beginning, there is a lot of additional details that fill in the gaps between each major event in the timeline, many of which we'll be diving into in other Star Wars themed episodes, if we haven't already. But this gives you a solid summary of the Jedi and their history thus far. As for reading recommendations, read the Star Wars Obi-Wan and Anakin graphic novel, Star Wars Volumes 1 through 3, and not reading but watch the Star Wars Rebels cartoon, and of course, all 7 Star Wars movies, episodes 1 through 7. First up for Wednesday, November 20th, we have Star Wars Annual Issue 2, which is very appropriate given today's episode. Anyway, Princess Leia is on top of a secret dangerous mission that brings her to a planet that wants nothing to do with the war against the Empire. And finally, we have Ghost Rider Issue 1. Robbie Reyes is back again. It's hell on wheels as the Spirit of Vengeance makes its roaring return. And that'll do it for another episode of Variant. But remember, you can always like our Variant Facebook page to keep up with the show and all things comic related. You could also follow Variant on Twitter at Variant Comics or me on Twitter at Arris_Quinones. But I'll see you guys next week when we talk about more Star Wars. Most foreign... It was an ancient rite of passage ritual. I spit. In vogue. In vogue. I messed up. I was supposed to go like this and I got stuck on this. It's my invisible lightsaber.